So our last speaker today is someone who is no stranger to inspiration, and that is Geoffrey Canada, who is president of the Harlem Children's Zone. And the title of his talk today is Toxic Stress. This year changes everything. So I'll turn it over to you. Wonderful to have you here, Geoffrey.
Thank you, Matthew. I did raise my hand for that last panel because I wanted to know how those young people got to be so smart. I mean, they were just brilliant, and I found it really powerful. This is more of an unusual talk for me because I am sort of live processing where we are right now in this country with a couple of other major themes that are all happening in America at the same time. And if I am right about what I suspect is going to happen in this country, I can just say for those of us who care about toxic stress, we haven't seen nothing yet. What's coming, in my opinion, is sort of unprecedented. I'll tell you how I feel about this. So I'm here in Harlem. It's been, a little bit more than a year since, we had to close our schools and we weren't coming into the building. And, we opened up and more gradually things are getting back to normal. But for reasons that are fairly complicated, I saw what was going to happen to Black and Brown communities by COVID before anybody else was paying attention to this issue. That this was going to be an airborne transmission. So you say, well, how would you know that? So it's like my crazy life. So Barbara knows I have 4 kids. My oldest son, Jerry, is a lawyer. His girlfriend decided she was going to teach English in China. So she happened to be in China when the outbreak occurred at Wuhan. So she was telling Jerry real live information from China about what was going on. And I recognized very quickly that we were in for a really devastating time. So this was a time, I just want you to remind you, the Surgeon General was telling folks not to wear masks. Folks were around saying, oh, the mayor, the governor, hey, no, don't put on masks. Actually, it's worse for you to wear a mask. I'm just hearing from a person who's a teacher that everybody over there knows you have to have on a mask. So I called Stan, and who was my board chair, and say, you got to get me $5 million so I can go buy 1 million masks for the folks in Harlem, because we're going to be devastated by this thing. It seems like nobody is paying attention to what's really going on. And it's a much longer story about trying to get masks out of China and all the stuff that happened. They were delayed forever. I was right. I was right. Saw information. I don't think you had to be a genius to realize those people working in those stores, driving those trains, taking the subways, were going to be devastated by this illness. And then another interesting thing happened to me. I remember calling Stan and telling him, before the death rate in New York City really got large, right? We were hearing a person or two. I knew 5 people who had passed away from COVID. And I said, if there's only like 400 people dead in New York State, how could I know 5 who happen to be Black and brown? I said, this thing is going to be a true disaster in our community. And again, nobody seemed to be paying any attention to this. I feel like I'm seeing the next wave of something people aren't paying attention to coming down. It is this toxic stress and what it's going to do to Black and brown communities. So I want to talk about that for a while. I was giving a talk this morning to, there was a whole group from Rhode Island, the governor and congresspersons, some senators. We were talking about trying to recover in terms of education in communities. So I missed the first part of the conference, but I came in during Nadine's talk, and I think she was just so terrific, and she laid out just so much of the science and other things. I want to put something different on the table. Race. I'm going to put race on the table. Nowadays, you know, people are talking about race. And I think it's very clear in this country. Your race determines largely whether you lived or died, whether you got sick, whether you ended up working at home or being on the front lines, whether your children got an education, and whether or not you're going to have anything that looks like a recovery from this experience. And I think as we're facing and thinking about toxic stress today, I want to put race squarely on the table because I feel like a couple of things are going on. One, I feel like the country is waking up to the experiences of being Black in this country and what it might mean, getting some glimmer. And at the same time, people are just feeling like, you know, I had enough of this. I don't want to talk about this stuff anymore. But I think that we have to consider the fact that for African Americans in America, their stress level, all of those chemical reactions that Nadine was talking about that occur when you're frightened, when you're scared, when you're anxious, happen at childbirth and for children and families, but it continues in ways that I think folks don't recognize. So I want to say two things. First, I want to do a disclaimer. I live a totally privileged life. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I live in a nice community. I was able to send my kids to good schools. I have great medical care and mental health care. You know, I've graduated from Ivy League institutions and written books and, you know, have had accolades and all of that stuff. So what I'm going to tell you, I do not want anybody thinking, oh, you need to feel sorry for Jeff Canada. That is not why I am saying these things. If you think about my life of privilege that I live right now, I'm at the extreme low end of the kind of stress that Black people are dealing with in this country all the time. And yet I still want to just say how prevalent this is in your life if you're Black. Stuff I don't talk about. A lot of times we don't talk about. Sometimes when Black people get together, we talk about these kind of things, but in general, you don't bring this up. The white colleagues and other folks, you just feel like this is part of the price of living in America. So when did I get into this whole, hey, there's something wrong with being Black thing? I'll tell you, for you to understand my first reaction to this, you have to know my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. He was 6 feet tall, maybe weighed 225 pounds, not an ounce of fat on him. He was the strongest, most sort of massive physical specimen of a man that I knew. Now I'm 4 and 5, and I'm just looking up to this man who could protect us. We were in the South Bronx. He was our protector. No one could mess with us because Grandpa, no one could beat this man. And one day they decided, the family, to go back to where they had escaped from. And I'm using that word escaped for reasons. Kinston, North Carolina. They decided we're going to go back to Kinston. And we got on a bus. I kind of remember having to move to the back of the bus. I was maybe 4 years old, but not really. And we went out to Kinston, and while we were there, they decided, because it wasn't anything to do in Kinston. It was a little town. I mean, it was no entertainment, there was no nothing. So they're like, let's go into town and we'll go to the store and like get cream soda. Great, that was going to be great activity after a boring days of doing nothing. But they sat us down and they said to us, when you see white people in town, do not look them in the eye. Do not say anything to them. Do not ask them any questions. You just look down and just wait until we're the adults, we're finished. And I'm like 4. I'm trying to process, what are they talking about? I mean, who are these people? And how gigantic must they be if they are going to cower my grandfather? They must be 6, 7, and weigh 300 pounds because no one could beat this man. And in we go into the store. And he's maybe 64 years old, sort of bent over, kind of shuffling along. And everybody has their eyes down, including my grandfather. And I said, wait, he can't be grandpa. Why am I scared of this guy? What is that? And I'm sitting there saying, something's wrong here. And my universe was shook up for the first time. I realized there was something about being Black that meant you were so defenseless, so powerless, so sort of unworthy that any white person, no matter who they were, and how small a timid, they could intimidate you, they could shut you down, they could take your voice and your pride without doing anything. Man never said a word. I couldn't wait to get out of North Carolina. I just thought this thing is a horror show. And I think about what it meant for all of those African Americans who left the terrorism of the South to come north to try to escape that kind of subjugation, what that meant. So it's I was young, I was kind of early, but these experiences, you young, you kind of forget that experience. It didn't really occur to me, this whole Black thing again, because I lived with mostly Black people, Black and Puerto Rican. They were the only ones in the South Bronx where we were. So I didn't really pay any attention to that. And I was riding my bike. I like to get up really early in the morning and ride in the South Bronx, because there was no cars on the road, no people, you didn't have to worry about gangs or getting beat up or any of that stuff. And I remember I was just riding, maybe I was 8 or 9, and I was riding alongside, and there's elevated trains in 3rd Avenue. And there was a police car under the train. I was riding on the side. And the police officer rolled down their window as they pulled up next to me. We're both riding parallel. And I looked at him and smiled. And he said to the other police officer, look at that monkey. Look at that monkey. And and they laughed and they drove off. And I just thought to myself, where did that come from? What was that? I mean, first, it's all Black and brown communities. It's not like I'm somewhere where white people are. The police officers happen to be white, but they mostly all were then. Started thinking that this race thing, maybe there was more to it than meets the eye. Now, I'm not exaggerating. This is not a horrible thing. I am telling you, I've lived a life pretty safe, pretty privileged. It continued. In Boston, I left Harvard. I started teaching in Boston in 1975. Anyone knows Boston 1975, busing was going on. Fully 20% of the city was off limits to Black people. I had never been in a city like that. How could you have places that Black people couldn't go? Couldn't go to South Boston, couldn't go to Charlestown, couldn't go to parts of East Boston. They were just off limits. If you were caught there, you were beaten up. I had never faced this circumstance before. of literally being afraid to cross a certain street. I had kids who lived in Dorchester I had to go visit, which was right close to Southie. And I never knew when I was crossing over that line. Our office was next to the North End. You were allowed in the North End to shop. You were not allowed after night. That was just how it was. Again, no one paid any mind, by the way. Wasn't like, when busing started, throwing bricks at the buses and people wrote about that. But no one in Boston paid any mind that Black people couldn't go places. And if you did, you would get beaten up. Or possibly somebody was killed in this. I think about being trapped. I didn't feel trapped. I was getting out of there. I was getting out of Boston. That's like I got out of North Carolina. I was getting out of Boston. I was like, no, that's not for me. I'm not going to be dealing with this the rest of my life. If you can get away, I think probably the stress, it has an impact on you, but probably not as much. But it wasn't just Boston. Barbara knows my wife Yvonne and I, we knew both her and Geoffrey, that we had our youngest, Jeff Jr. And it was funny because I didn't want to have Jeff Jr. In Harlem, even though we were living and from Harlem. I wanted to have him down in Midtown. And the day Yvonne delivered, they told her that they didn't have her admitted in Midtown. We had to be admitted in Harlem. So I didn't pay attention to it. It's Harlem. Go to Harlem. I go, I'm the dad. We practice all our breathing. We were going to be there. I was going to be, she had the baby. I was in the room. It was like, whoa, that's amazing. I cut the umbilical cord. It was great. It was this moment you have. And then I remember one of the social workers came in afterwards and just said to me, excuse me, Mr. Canada, will you leave the room? I said, leave like right now? Leave? They said, yeah, I'm going to talk to your wife about something. I said, well, you want to talk to my wife about something I can't hear about? I'm going to talk to your wife about something. Said, yeah. I said, well, what do you want to talk to her about? Said, no, we prefer not talk to her in front of you. I was like, but no, we're not newlyweds. We've been married 5 years and this is our child. It said, no, I'd rather not talk. So I have a thing. I get a little angry sometimes. Some of you may know that. I wasn't leaving. So I'm going to talk to my wife about AIDS and whether or not she was worried that I'd given her AIDS. Now I thought to myself, after they sent me downstairs, they wouldn't tell me why they were sending me downstairs. So once you go downstairs, we want you to see this clerk. So I go see the clerk. They want me to sign a paternity paper for my son. Now they know I'm married. They know this is Mr. and Mrs. Canada. They want me to sign a paternity paper. So I get in one of these philosophical conversations. Why would you have me sign a paternity paper when you know that's my wife upstairs and I'm claiming my child? And they were like, no, Mr. Canada, this is just every Black person, I assume, who went into that hospital was treated that way. And if you want to know why some Black people have concerns about doctors and treatment, that could be a reason. That could be a reason. So now our third kid, my wife and I were living in Harlem. Our third oldest is 16. We're across from the state park. His girlfriend, they were at the park. His girlfriend runs up, knocks on the door, tells my wife and I that they arrested Bruce. The police arrested him. I'm like, why would the police arrest him in the park? I don't know. They just came in, they put handcuffs on him and they took him away. So my wife was really upset. I did not want her coming with me to go deal with the police because she would be upset. But I know if she gets upset, I know what's going to happen. Black people know what happens if you deal with the police and you act really upset. So I ask her to stay. I go down and I approach the guy who is in the sort of guardhouse leading into the state park. I explain, hi, My son was just arrested. I understand he's inside the park and some officers have him. And so this is going to sound like an exaggeration, but I just want you to imagine this. Do you remember the look on Derek Chauvin's face when he had his knee on George Floyd? You know that look, like I could care less. That's how that cop looked at me. Like, really, it's a nice, bright day out here, and this is what you're coming to me with? So I'm nice. I won't leave. I make them bring me my son. He tells me what happened. They did the whole thing, threw him on the ground, put the knee on his neck, grounded in. They thought he was smoking marijuana. He wasn't. He didn't smoke marijuana. I know. I experienced this as a father, watching my child be treated like this. And I recognize that's just a common everyday experience for Black people in this country. So you say, okay, that's your experience of being Black in America. I would say that if ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, the C, childhood, I would say that one of the things that's happening in our country is that these adverse experiences go on and on and on and on if you're Black in America. And while I know the research about what happens to children when they're exposed to all of these kinds of toxic stressors, I think about what happens when you're Black and you're just living through this. And again, I'm speaking from a place of total privilege. This is nothing in comparison of being Black and poor. No choices, no ability to recover, to rebuild your ego, your sense of worth. And that to me is the next portion of what I think we have to study. But you have to say, so, but why is this time different? Because there are two different things that's going on. One is COVID and what happened with COVID. Terror in the Black community that went on and is still, some cases, still going on. The toxic stress, you know how long that lasted? This was New York was ground zero of that stuff, month after month after month. Half of the time, you didn't even know what was going to make you sick. You couldn't go out, but you had to go out. And then what do? If you had a cough or a cold, you were terrified. That stress did not impact one part of our community. It impacted everybody. Grandparents, parents, children, friends, neighbors, everybody experiencing long-term toxic stress. Without, by the way, it ending for a whole bunch of people. There are a whole bunch of people who can't pay their rent. They don't know how they're going to go back to work. They're worried about getting evicted. A lot of them have gotten COVID, and they're worried about these long-term impacts of what's going on. There is still this sense of anxiety and fear and dis-ease in the Black community. But what kind of impact is that going to have on our families? Then I want to add an additional challenge. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, how many cases? Now, I want you to understand this. I never saw a lynching. Read about them, heard about them, saw a picture or two. But I never saw a Black man being killed by white people because he was just a Black man. George Floyd, we watched over and over and over and over. That image is seared into the psyche, and not just Black. I mean, I think it affected everybody. But if you are Black, now remember, I'm connecting this to the everyday experience that Black people are going through in America, the indignities, the fear, the anxiety. And then you add this new trauma, COVID, that stress, this place we're at in this country where every week there's a new killing of a Black man or woman by the police force. You add the constant, homicides are up all over in poor communities. More kids are being killed. You add it up, and I'm telling you, 2019, 2020, it's going to be a watershed event when it comes to dealing with toxic stress in this country. And if we thought we had a problem before, we have not seen, in my opinion, the impact that this is going to have. Because remember, the one thing we know about toxic stress, it's not like it goes away in 2 or 3 weeks. It's not even like it manifests all of its impact in a month or 2. These are long-term, powerful physical and emotional influences on the body. And so part of what I'm suggesting we need to do is have a radical redefinition of what we need to do to recover in this country. Everybody's waiting for recovery, back to normal. When can we go to baseball games? I heard, that them saying, hey, we think you're gonna be able to take the mask off outside. Heard Dr. Fauci say, yeah, pretty soon you're gonna take the mask off inside. Everybody is so tired of being locked up. We wanna get back to normal. There's a whole group of Americans who are not gonna be back to normal. Nothing close to normal. And I worry, and our exuberance of trying to remember what life was like in 2017 and 2018, that we're going to rush right past this fact that for years, we're going to have to be working with children and families who have been so stressed out, so emotionally overwrought, that it's going to cause some generational challenges unless we can tackle it. So that's why this time is unlike any other time. This is not what it was. To me, this is a new phenomenon that we're facing. And I think we got to do some radical things. I think we got to think big. I think we got to think constant. And I heard Nadine, she was talking about it. What are we going to do in schools? What are we going to do after schools? What are we going to do with families? What are we going to do with individuals? How are we going to find the supports for all of those folks? And I'm telling you, it's a much larger picture than we saw before, because it's whole families, it's whole generations, it's whole communities that were impacted by this. And so as we're thinking about what recovery looks like, I think we've got to feel like the work that we're involved with, that we're going to have to make sure that we're advocating on every level of government for real significant resources to come into the field, that we can support both the acute challenges we're facing right now as children go back to schools and families go back to work, but also the long-term challenges that we're going to face as a nation. And I feel a little bit like I did when I heard about the need for masks coming in from China. Because we have been thinking about toxic stress, we've been meeting on it, we've been talking to the top scientists about it, we have a pretty good understanding, we've got some treatments for it. I feel like we've laid the foundation just in time, just in time. Now the question is, can we activate a response that's powerful enough to meet the need out there? And that's where I think I'm hoping we're going to put our energy. So, I don't want to end on a note that's sort of not uplifting, But this is what I've been just worried about this and thinking that this is a time when we're all thinking about race and inequality and inequity. But here's an area that I think we're going to have to really focus in on if we're going to make a difference. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I would be happy to take questions from my colleagues.
Thank you, Geoffrey. As always, you always kind of blow me away. I mean, not say it's both sort of inspirational in that, you know, your last comment that you're not here to make us feel good, but you always do make us feel in the end. I think sort of feel both the sort of the personal um, obligation and opportunity that, you know, that we can, as you, as an individual, can really make a difference. So I just want to thank you for everything that you've done. And so for questions, so I don't see anything in the panel.
Can I throw out a question?
Please do.
Jeff, thank you so much for that talk. I feel like you were speaking directly to me, as I'm sure everyone on that was listening. And I think that you're right in everything that you are saying. And I think that the confluence of the COVID-19 pandemic with seeing the way that it disproportionately impacted communities of color, with witnessing the killing of George Floyd and what that, you know, I think that there is a different awakening that's happening right now. But I will, you know, it's my question, and I meant to say an uplifting question, but I'll just say I'm going to speak reals because I feel like if I have an opportunity to talk to you, I will, which is that it seems like there is a difference in some of the national conversation, or even, you know, the work that's happening at the state level, between our stated intentions and our actions, right? When it comes to race, when it comes to equity, when it comes to health equity. And I will say that, for example, you know, we talk about all the stuff, we have all this data, we have all the science, it's fairly incontrovertible, and we know what is going to be necessary to address many of these issues. And yet it seems like the fear of talking about race, or the fear that something, a policy, a practice, or whatever would appear to be a race preference, stops us from doing the thing that we know reduces the harm and the damage, right? And as a result, we look at the data, we look at the information, we look at the science, and we say, oh, this is terrible. Look at all these people being harmed. We should do something about it. And then any policy that would actually do things about it, right? No one's willing to do it because, well, that would appear to be a race preference.
I mean, yeah, well, you weren't uplifting, Nadine, because you got right to, you said you were gonna keep it real, and you kept it real. So this has been the big challenge. I wish I could remember this woman's name who wrote about how you could convince poor whites to give up their pools by letting Black people use the pools.
Heather McGee.
Thank you. I mean, here is what, and this is a political strategy. It is so cynical. It's so evil. But folks have figured out, if we say this is for them, we can convince a whole bunch of white people who also are in pain, and so that they don't want it, and they'll walk away from it. And here, race has been used over and over again to divide. So almost so the folks who are pushing this are scared, right, to tell the truth about it. And that, I think, is part of the challenge. So I expect that this is going to become a racial issue, that they're going to try and make it into, we can't do that for them because, you know, this is now going to be considered, part of this new conversation on race that you can see everybody's already pushing back on the woke conversation, and the critical race theory is now the hottest political button in the country, right? That to me is just transparent, shutting down the avenues that will allow the resources to flow to certain communities to right historical wrongs, which I think some of us are going to have to continue to fight for, but it's not going to be easy.
I have a question actually, now that Nadine and Geoffrey are both unmuted. And kind of going back to, Geoffrey, your work, Harlem Children's Zone, and your kind of stories growing up in an urban environment. And then a lot of these issues that are larger than that, you bring up COVID, and sort of our current political situation. A lot of that can go beyond the kind of urban concentration and include a dialogue, the urban-rural conversation. And so how rural communities are being impacted and how they can be reached. And Nadine, to you, given that sort of now, as sort of Surgeon General of the state of California, where you also have that sort of the kind of extreme kind of urban-rural divide where both sort of the interests, the needs, and the messaging can be, so hard to extend in a uniform way to all these communities, because they are, in many ways so very different, not just in terms of their sort of the political ideology, but sort of what they see as community, their obligations to other people, the trust in when medicine, medical practitioners, just how you reach all of them. So I think sort of finding our solutions to all of these things sort of requires that we also kind of step back and say, there really are, there are two Americas in many different ways, but, not just black and white, but also sort of the urban rural. And Geoffrey, just what you're thinking, sort of Harlem, as something that can extend to this other part of the country.
And Nadine, feel free to jump in, but this is interesting because one of the promised neighborhoods, one of the best promised neighborhood sites is in rural Kentucky, run out of Berea, Kentucky. And they work in rural America. And you know what they found? They need all the same stuff. They got all the same issues. It's funny because I went to Berea to speak, right? And when I go to these places, I'm kind of, oh, they're bringing Jeff Canada, and I said, oh, I'm great to go to your community and talk. And as gently as she could, she told me, no, Jeff, they don't want to see you. You can come to the college, but this is not the place where Black people show up to rally the troops. And I was good with that because there's something about poverty that is universal. So I had a friend of mine who does a lot of policy work, and he knows how I feel about the child tax credit, right? They're actually going to reduce poverty in children in this country significant. It's unheard of. And I'm just like, how can we get this thing permanent? And he came on and said, Jeff, I'm organized. I want to get this thing permanent. Oh, I want to work with you. I said, no, you don't want to work with me. You want to work with rural white people who are getting this child tax credit. You do not want this to look like something that's going to Black people, because the moment you do this, you're going to do their work for them. And there are plenty of white folks who are going to be they are desperate for this money. They need to be able to go out and say that we've gotten it. But this is unfortunately where we are in the country. And I know if you can say this is a Black thing, this child care tax credit, there'll be plenty of white rural poor folks who will be against it because they'll think it's for them. And that is something that, unfortunately, it's a terrible political game. Again, I think it's really cynical, but I feel like we've got to be smart enough this time that we can make real movement on poverty in children. This time we got to be smart enough to just do the right thing on this. And Barbara knows that we've had a number of talks at the foundation about what's called flyover country. And can't we work in that part of America, because those folks have real needs too, and they feel like they're being ignored and nobody cares about them. And we've done some reaching out, but I think we need to do more.
And I will just add that I'll bring in Brian's voice into this, what we heard from him earlier, where he talked about proximity, right? I think getting proximate with addressing that, the universality of some of these challenges with rural communities. That was something that I did when I began my tenure as California Surgeon General. I did a listening tour and went out to, went and visited many of our communities. And California is much like the United States in terms of, we have counties that are blue counties and counties that are red counties and counties that are purple counties. And lots of California is agricultural. There are a lot of rural centers there, and the politics is very diverse, and really getting proximate and understanding how we bring folks together and get away from this drain the pool mentality that Heather McGee describes in her book, The Sum of Us. I think is really important. And that's part of the reason, and there's something that we've all been talking about, and I think Brian touched on it earlier, also was this piece around the climate that the federal administration and the leadership at the highest level has been promoting and encouraging for the past 4 years, for the previous 4 years, in terms of this climate of anger and fear, right? Because that promotes the drain the pool mentality, where folks don't want to have end child poverty, even though it would help so many Americans, right? Because they perceive it as a benefit for them as opposed to us, right? And figuring out how we begin to navigate that. And that's a little bit a part of the reason why it's been so important to me in terms of bringing in the science of toxic stress and understanding that it's about being human, right? It's about biology, and that fundamentality, that is something that every community I go to, they say, oh, this is our issue, right? And that's something that we see a lot, and healing our communities hopefully is something that is shared, that is common, and finding those common places. And frankly, how we communicate about it and market it, right, is critically important to be able to sidestep some of these pieces. The last thing I will say, again, I said at the beginning of my talk, is that the strength of the science is the foundation upon which these policies rest. Because I will never forget that when the previous administration was separating children from their parents at the border, the legal ruling, right, the district court ruling that enjoined that behavior, that policy, cited the science of toxic stress and said, we know that this policy is damaging, that it causes harm to the brains and bodies of children. And that is where the work that we all do here every day comes to bear on policy and practice, right? Because when we have the strength of the science, we have to drive it into policy, into educational policy, into housing policy, into immigration policy, into all of this stuff, because we know that it's damaging. And especially post-pandemic, it's even more important.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I don't know if there are any last questions, anyone? We're right on time. So if there are no last questions, I have the privilege of giving closing remarks. So of course, first and foremost, I want to thank everybody who has participated in this. We've done this for many years, and the thing I always take away from this, I'm just going to have to steal Geoffrey's lines there. That when he closes, said, I'm not going to make you feel good, but I'm going to make you feel. And I think that this is the thing that I take away from this. Unlike other symposia that I go to, certainly there's a lot of science, and what we take away is very useful. But it's not just what we learn, what we know. But I think it's the sense that we come away with a sense of what we can do, that we feel not good, but we can feel empowered. I think hearing the stories of the young people in the panel, their individual stories of action and empowerment. I think, what does it take to actually take our science and turn it into something that can improve the lives of all of us, our children, our country. And, I just come away feeling like there are things that we can do, and there are people that are actually out there doing it. To see Nadine come in, early on when, she was talking about the science and the ACEs, and now see her as, Surgeon General, first Surgeon General of the state of California, and in position to take that science and actually use it as a blunt instrument to sort of beat back ignorance, to beat back, all of those things that that harm children, and to make a change. To me, it really is inspirational to see the trajectory on, and to hear Geoffrey. It's always remarkable. I don't think you ever use any slides. I don't think you've ever used any slides, and yet I come away with such powerful imagery, to really see and understand both where you've come from, but where you can see us going to. And I think with sort of that message of empowerment, taking the science and using it to move us forward. Of course, I have to thank all of those that have made this possible, the Picower Institute, the Barbara Picower in particular, but also the JPB Foundation, who has really taken it as their mission to address these issues of great societal concern, to target those things that can and should be done, that include things that affect children, poverty, the environment, medical research, and and child health. It's the message that together, with knowledge, with community, and with sort of the means to act, we can make changes. So I don't know, Geoffrey, maybe I do feel good afterward. I feel better. Maybe I feel better. I feel like that we are on a path to change, and maybe there will be some turmoil, but hopefully in the end we are in a better place, all of us. And so I just want to thank everyone for so this year's symposium, and sort of looking forward to the next symposia, when we will be able to report on how much better things have gotten. So with that, I want to thank all the organizers, of course, to Brittany and Asha and everyone in the Picower headquarters that have made this possible. All the technical things that we now just sort of take for granted, but nothing can be taken for granted. Making these things work in a virtual format takes a lot more than just kind of getting up and giving our talks. So thanks to all. And with that, I will close it.